This is Greg Crew with the McDowell County Federation of Teachers. We want to talk today about your student learning goal in the West Virginia Teacher Evaluation System. And we're going to talk about three things. First, we're going to talk about using the online tool in Weave as well. We also want to talk about SMART goals and how to write a SMART goal. The guide that is available for the evaluation process at the West Virginia Department of Education site doesn't actually mention SMART goals, but many of their training materials do, and they've included that as one of the requirements for having a successful goal in their training material at least. So we're going to look at what a SMART goal is later in this video and how to write one. Finally, we're going to look at the new West Virginia growth model. If you were involved in the evaluation process last year in this new process, you might wonder how the West Virginia growth model that goes into effect this year will affect how you write student learning goals. We're going to look at that model and how it will impact your student learning goals toward the end of this video. This is what the online form for entering your student learning goal looks like. If you're to this point in the process, you probably know where to find this form. Like the rest of the evaluation process in Weave as well, this form is only available inside your school building. I sincerely hope that Weave as well becomes available to educators outside the school building at some point in the future so that they can work on their own personal evaluation, professional evaluation in the privacy of their own home instead of having to hang around after school to work on this in the building. This is a closer look at the form. The first thing that you need to do is enter a name for your goal, and it should be a practical name, 6th grade math goal, something like that. You get up to 50 characters, and that includes your spaces to do that. The context of the goal is something that you can describe. Who are the learners? What are their environment? Talk about whether you're in a general ed classroom or some sort of a pull-out intervention setting. Talk about the type of learners that you have and whether you have them all day or whether you only teach them for a particular subject, those sorts of things. The next window on your goal form is for the specific content area. Basically, you just have to put what subject area you're working in. Baseline data is a spot on the form where you can enter information about where your students are at. This is an important part of the form because if your goal is to show student growth, to show that you've moved a percentage of your students from not having mastery of a concept to having mastery of a concept, this baseline data is your starting point. Number 4 is the goal itself, and this is limited to 500 characters. I've seen goals written out that took in many more characters, and the only problem with that is they won't actually fit on the online form that the West Virginia Department of Ed has for you. So you need to limit all of these to 500 characters. The goal itself is going to be something that we'll talk in more detail about, but this is where you enter your goal. Strategies for attaining the goal is a spot where you can talk about how you're going to go about achieving this goal. Maybe it's an intervention program where you have small groups of students. Maybe it's using material provided by some outside resource that targets specific goals. You want to be sure and be as detailed as the 500 characters on the form allow you to be in this and describe what it is that you're going to do to achieve this goal. Spot number 6 here on the form is for collaboration, and you want to find a way to describe collaboration with other classroom teachers, with teachers in your grade, with teachers in the grade above or below if possible, with your building's interventionists, your Title I people, your special ed people. That collaboration, the fact that you collaborated in achieving the goal, makes it possible for you to be distinguished on the goal. If you do not collaborate, even if you achieve your goal, you cannot be distinguished. Spot number 7 is for the measures that you're going to use, and you're going to describe here what assessments you're going to use in order to measure achievement of the goal. Maybe it's the Scholastic Math Inventory or the Scholastic Reading Inventory. Maybe it's the McGraw-Hill Acuity Benchmark Sessions. Maybe it's a teacher-made test. Maybe it's completion of some kind of a project. But you're going to describe that measure in this spot. There's a place here to describe, to check if you're going to use West test data. I really don't understand why that's there, because the training material all says that you can't use West test data. Personally, I would not want to wait until August when West test data became available before I would know whether or not I had achieved my goal. You're going to be asked to affirm 3 different things about your goal by checking little boxes on the form. One is that you have 2 data points. That does not mean that you have 2 different assessments. It means that you're giving the same or very similar assessments at least 2 different times. They want those assessments to take in at least a 9-week period of time. The second little box that they're going to want you to check is to say that your assessments that you're using are rigorous, and the definition of rigor has been debated. There is no clear, easy definition of rigor, but basically this cannot be a simple test full of depth of knowledge 1 items. Finally, they're going to want you to check a box that affirms that the assessments that you're using for your learning goal have comparability. That means that I could compare them in different classrooms. You know, I could give them across the hall in the other 4th grade classroom and they would work just as well. Or that if I'm a 4th grade teacher doing this, that 4th grade teachers in another county could use this tool just the same way that I am and get basically the same sorts of results. At the end of the year, when you meet with your evaluator, you're going to get a rating on each of your two student learning goals. If you make no progress towards your goal, you're going to get a rating of unsatisfactory. If you make progress towards your goal, but that progress is not consistent, you're going to receive a rating of emerging. If you make consistent progress towards your goal, even if you don't achieve your goal, you should receive a rating of accomplished on the goal. If you achieve your goal and you can show that you've collaborated with other teachers, don't let your administrator give you a rating of accomplished. You have reached the definition of distinguished. Also, don't let your administrator tell you that you must achieve your goal in order to be accomplished. The rubric does not say that. You can be accomplished on this without actually achieving the goal. You just have to show consistent progress toward it. Let's talk about writing a SMART goal now. SMART is an acronym. I've seen a number of variations as to what it stands for, but the training material at the West Virginia Department of Education uses the one pictured here: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Having a specific goal means that you're not just trying to improve your students' overall math or reading abilities. It means that you have targeted some particular skill that the students need to improve with. Usually it means that you've targeted a particular objective underneath some standard within your content area. Give you an example here. A statement that your students will score higher on the Scholastic Math Inventory isn't a very specific goal. It may be measurable, but the Scholastic Math Inventory measures success at all math objectives. On the other hand, if you say that your students will do better at multiplication or at comparing and contrasting numbers and putting them in order from smallest to largest depending on your grade level, that's a more specific goal. Your goal also has to be measurable. Measurable means that there's some sort of an instrument that I can use to say, yes, this student is proficient, or no, this student isn't proficient. There has to be cut scores. I have to be able to talk about the percentage of my students who have moved from non-mastery into mastery. That's basically what measurable means. Is my goal attainable? That's a question that is a little bit subjective, but anytime that you use the word all of my students will understand the Pythagorean theorem, or all of my students will be able to read at a certain lexile level. That you set yourself up to have a goal that is not attainable, because a single individual student's failure basically means that you don't achieve your goal. Your goal needs to be relevant. That means that it needs to be connected to the curriculum. It doesn't necessarily mean that your goal has to focus on the same items that your school's strategic plan is focused on, although that's a possibility. But definitely your goal has to be connected to the material that you're studying in class. Finally, is my goal time-bound? I have to be able to set parameters and say, I'm going to start my work on my student learning goal in the second 9 weeks, and we're going to take 9 weeks to work on this particular item, and after 9 weeks we're going to measure it again and see what percentage of my students demonstrate mastery on that item. Here's a brief overview that you can look at of the requirements for a student learning goal. Let's look at the new growth model that West Virginia has and how that will impact your student learning goals. You're looking at the scales that all schools have attached to them now for what they need to accomplish in order to achieve their growth goals. And as you can see, there are a number of categories there. Last year, proficiency was the only thing that mattered. This year we have the achievement gap being closed, which is how students who are part of some subgroup perform in relationship to the school as a whole. So if you take your special ed population or some minority population and you improve its achievements, you get more points towards your index score that you need. Observed growth, that's how students are improving no matter where they start from. So if you have a lot of novices in some grade or in some area of your school population, and those novices improve to partial mastery, you get credit for that in terms of index points now. Adequate growth is the idea that students are approaching mastery. So if you have those partial mastery students and their scale scores go up and they come closer to being actual mastery students, why you'll see points for that. Does that affect the student learning goals? Here's an example of the values that have been attached to this this model for a high school in Kanawha County. And as you can see, 35% of the available points come from whether or not students are proficient, and another 10% come from whether or not students who are nearing proficiency moved closer to it. Only 5% of the points on this particular school's scale come from where novices move up to partial mastery under that observed growth. And the achievement gap, the progress that students make if they're in some sort of a subgroup that's performing lower than the overall school, is another 20 points. But the majority of the points here, the single biggest portion at least, still come simply from whether or not your students are performing at the level of proficiency, whether or not they're showing mastery on the test. So in my opinion, student learning goals aren't going to be impacted greatly by this. The goal for most student learning goals is still going to be to move students to proficiency. And as you look at the long-term goal of having 75% of your student body be proficient in the tested areas on the major test each year, the goal is still one of moving students into proficiency. So I don't see that as changing the way student learning goals are going to be written. I want to close with giving you some tips to remember, and the number one tip is that your student learning goals are your goals. Don't let anybody tell you what goal to write, what goal you have to write. Your administrator has to agree to your student learning goal, but you have to agree to it also. My second tip is that you should measure learning in students you actually teach. Specify in your goal the students that you're being held responsible for as part of the goal. Don't be sucked into a plan where your learning goal takes in students from other classrooms. You write a 5th grade goal and your goal is that all 5th graders will improve, when some of those students aren't students that you actually have access to teach. If students are pulled out of your room and taught a particular subject by another teacher, don't include them in your student learning goals. My third tip is that you should exclude students from your data if they don't come to school. Set some sort of cutoff point. When I wrote my goals last year, I specified that students whose attendance rate fell below 80% would not be counted in my data. Another tip that you need to remember is to collaborate and document that collaboration. You cannot be distinguished if you don't collaborate with other teachers. Finally, keep in mind that your goals are part of a confidential evaluation process. Even if you collaborate with other teachers in trying to achieve them, you don't have to talk about what your goals are with other people if you don't want to. You don't have to tell anybody what your goals are except your evaluator. There's a guide to the evaluation process at the West Virginia Department of Education, and this is what the cover of it looks like if you don't already have a copy. Because the guide has been available in a PDF format, a digital format, last year and the year before, be sure on the second page that you have the 2013-2014 copy of the guide. I hope you do well on your student learning goals.